we're going to talk about how prehistory, the giants, the Nephilim, shape end-time prophecy.
The giants, which are the offspring of the fallen angels, they are described as serpents. But this is also telling us that this bloodline is going to be with us throughout history.
Yeah.
So somehow, some way, we're going to be dealing with the giants and the ramifications of the fallen angels that has been plaguing us ever since.
We see that he goes and he speaks to these spirits. But then we see in the book of Revelation, they will be released in the time of tribulation.
Not even the fallen angels know what the end game for God is going to be until the conversation that Jesus has with them. From that point on, the fallen angels know the gig is up. Just Jesus and the disciples, they travel up to the Bashan region. And Bashan is called the land of giants. Mount Hermon is not well discussed within the church, and it's probably the most important place on the earth for polytheism. So one of the relationships in the first allegory is that these beast empires have an intimate relationship with Israel.
And of course, that will be the shock for a lot of Jews, because then they will realize when he really reveals himself, oh, this is not the Messiah.
So I could bring somebody back from the dead from Abraham's bosom and nobody would believe him. And then he raised Lazarus from the dead who was asleep, which because he's human, right? And nobody obviously believed him. When we look at the chronology that Jesus provides in Matthew 24, there's a specific generation that we're not taught about in the church. The people living in the land of the covenant at that time will be permitted to begin their sacrifices again, which cannot happen while Islam is still separate from the universal religion.
You can see some of those things happening already, even with the Catholic Church. They just want to include all other religions already and being more open to be okay with everything. There's going to be this millennium kingdom. And then after that, the devil's going to be released, but he's going to gather the whole world again. So I think a lot of people also wonder, how is that possible? After Jesus' perfect reign on earth, how could that be? Hey guys, welcome back to DLM Lifestyle. Today we have a very interesting video for you guys. We're gonna go back, we're gonna talk about how prehistory, the giants, the Nephilim, shape end time prophecy. And I actually brought in a special guest, someone who wrote the book about it. You can see it right here. Gary Wayne, welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be here today, and so happy to talk about some of the things in book 2 versus book 1, even though they dovetail quite nicely. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about today, particularly for Christians, and particularly that book 2 is directed directly at Christians and goes deeper into the Bible than I think any other book that's out there. It is totally unique, and it will make the Old Testament come to life, and it'll make end-time prophecy seem straightforward.
Right. And I can say he's not joking around here. I read some of the book and I talked to him a little bit. Well, this is going to get interesting. So let's just jump right into this. But for those of you who might not know Gary Wayne, he spent 45 years researching biblical prophecy, history, and mythology, uncovering the interesting mysteries of the Bible. He also spent a lot of time with the Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita and Rig Vedas, the Popol Vuh, Epic of Gilgamesh, even the Ugaritic text and other ancient epics, and also language, etymology, and secret society publications. Now, we believe 100% what the Bible says, but it is interesting to study all of these other things as well, ancient history, and see how it connects with the Bible. Now, the 2 books that you can get, please get these books. It is super interesting. The first book is Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. The second book, our title for today, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Help Define End Time Prophecy. Now, if you don't mind, Gary, I'm going to start it off here with a Bible verse that a lot of people maybe miss and go back to Genesis when God talked to the devil. And he said in Genesis 3, verse 15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. And he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So already there's these two lines coming here because there are seeds, and I'm going to leave it to you, Gary, to explain it so that people can get to know you. Go for it.
Yeah, so that's what I call a curse prophecy. And so you get obviously the curse that's going to happen to the serpent and the
Right.
implications and the consequences for the actions in Eden and participating with Satan and or perhaps even more of the fallen angels to what I call in book one call enact Satan's first revenge.
Hmm.
And this is now referencing a second revenge as that's going to be fulfilled. And the serpent is the Hebrew word Nahash, and it means a serpent. And it's also rooted in another word that's called Nahash that means a sorcerer, a necromancer, all of these terms that we would associate with wizards and priests of the occult.
Hmm.
So this walking, talking, intelligent being is a being that's already in place and is working with fallen angels and particularly Satan to bring
Right.
down humanity. And now we get this very bizarre sort of something that would drive cognizant dissonance, no matter how you're going to look at that. And it's so early on in the Bible, and yet most people just sort of, and as I did, just sort of, as you're reading through the Bible, say, well, whatever that is, I don't want anything to do with. And of course, we get a lot of that in the Bible because it's the most preternatural book that's was ever written. And so when we look at this serpent, I mean, we're not saying that this serpent that uh, is going to create a seed specifically with Eve in that instance, because it's a prophecy and it's a curse prophecy, just as when you get into the curse of Ham, the curse is going to play out with Canaan, who's not even born yet. And it's a curse prophecy. So it's a style of prophecy that is in the Old Testament. And there are different styles of prophecies, but this one's really unique and it happens so early on. It's probably
Right.
the first prophecy. Um, you could look at a few things with the introduction of Adam as prophetic, and I think it has prophetic implications, but this is a specific prophecy. So it's not saying that there's going to be seed created from this walking, talking, intelligent being that's taller than humankind with Eve. And it's not talking about the species as we understand the serpent today that would be, slimy and crawling on the ground that's going to meet with Eve. This is
Right. All
talking
the
about something
pictures.
in the future. Yeah. And these are
Yeah.
bloodlines of sentient beings. And this is the end of the Nahash being a sentient being and all of its various kinds, however many kinds that there were. So we don't get a lot of descriptions biblically as to who might be the serpent, except that we get seraphim angels in Isaiah 6, which are six winged angels. They work before the altar of God in the fiery stones. And seraph or seraphim, as in the plural, means a fiery or copper colored serpent faced angel, a heavenly dragon, as in a dragon creator god, as in the
Yeah.
serpent gods that populate the ancient pantheons. And so when they took a physical body, they're going to pass on this DNA. And we talked previously of how that happens and how we get biblical support that angels can take physical forms and how this DNA is passed on. So they would pass on what they looked like. So
Yeah.
in antediluvian times and early post-diluvian times, the giants, which are these offspring of the fallen angels, the sons of God, that we covered off in part 1, they are described as serpents in both before the flood and early after the flood. So this is the fulfillment of that. But this is also telling us that this bloodline is going to be with us throughout history,
Yeah.
throughout our history. And it's going to be a competing bloodline. And so for people who aren't sure that bloodlines are actually in the Bible, it is. And we get in Daniel 2:43 prophecy that concerns the seed line that's going to mix with humankind. And Psalms 21:8-10 that is talking about this bloodline that is going to be removed from humankind, that their seed will be removed and their fruit will be removed from humankind in the end time, in the time of the wrath of God. So this has been with us from the beginning and to the end, and we're told about it from the beginning when it is prophesied and then fulfilled in Genesis 6.
Yeah. Maybe we can read that Genesis 6 verse 4 for new Christians as well, who are like, what are you guys talking about? What is this Nephilim? Maybe we can read that to them very quick. I'll read it for them very quick here.
Sure.
It says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, meaning after the flood, when the sons of God, meaning angels there, came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown.
Yeah, it's a very, very important passage, and these early passages set down the whole context for the history that's going to play out in the Old Testament right through to the end time. So what's really sort of shocking to people once you start to come to this realization that there's giants that are real,
Right.
that were born, which is difficult to comprehend at first as well, particularly how we're not prepared for that understanding within the churches, even though it's giving us the context of why we're here and what's going on in this world. And that this seed line, this bloodline is going to be resolved only in the end time.
Yeah.
So somehow, some way, we're going to be dealing with the giants and the ramifications of the fallen angels who created this spurious, non-permitted bloodline that has been plaguing us ever since. And we get another allusion to this bloodline in Isaiah 14, in the famous passage that tells us important information about prehistory, has important prophecies for the time of Isaiah, but has specific prophecies unfulfilled for the end time. And it's, I coin it just for my own understanding, what I call a dual prophecy. Again, a unique kind of prophecy, one of the different kinds, just as Ezekiel 28 would be another one. And Ezekiel 32 and Isaiah 25, they're all unique prophecies in that sort of way. When we look at this prophecy in Isaiah 14, we have this serpent's root that's being manifested in a seraphim somehow, some way in Isaiah 14:25-29, where you have the Assyrian who's going to be dealt with on the mountains of Israel in the end time. So that's part of that dual prophecy where you have those prophecies yet to be fulfilled. And on that mountain, on the mountains, that the Assyrian is going to be killed, as Revelation 19 describes, along with the false prophet at Armageddon. This is when the branch of the terrible ones of Ezekiel 32 that we talked about just a second ago, as part of one of these dual prophecies, will be destroyed on a mountain, which is likely going to be Mount Hermon. And Mount Hermon is not well discussed within the church, and it's probably the most important place on the earth for polytheism. And it was originally part of Eden, as it sits at the top. As you look at the description in Genesis 2 of Eden, it goes from the Nile to the Euphrates. And by the other descriptions that you're going to see and understanding, it's going to be from basically Mount Hermon, and the mountains in the north down to the Red Sea, Sea of Aqaba, Indian Ocean type of waters, to give you the four goalposts on that, and that it would have overseen Eden. And this is their most holiest mountain in polytheism, and it's one that is talked about in the Bible. And Mount Hermon is rooted in the Hebrew word haram and harem, Charem, and they
Mm.
mean curse and accursed, because this is the accursed mountain, although it was considered at one time the holy mountain. So it was like a poke in the eye to God in the mountain over Eden to take the oath of Haram anathema. Notice that word haram,
Yeah.
anathema, that is going to be sworn by the fallen angels, the 200 original ones, according to the book of Enoch. Not that they created the giants there, but they took the oath to carry it out to the end, no matter what the consequences. And biblically, Haram is the name that is a replacement name for that we get Hermon from, and it is alternatively called in the Bible Mount Sion, Mount
Yeah.
Shinir, and Sirion, and in the Ugaritic texts where it talks about the Baalim and the Rephaim giants, this is Mount Saphon. So it was known by many different names, and Mount Nippur in the Sumerian version, where the Council of the Gods and the Council, or the Ring Lords of the Giants, and in the Ugaritic text called the Council of the Titanu, um, were also there, which is the Council of the Royal Giants, dynastic giants, and then above them that they report to is the Council of the Gods. So it is an
Mm.
important mountain, and part of the important part of the gift of the land that God is going to give to Israel, and then
Right.
ensure that that gift is fulfilled in the millennium, as many of the Old Testament prophecies talk about.
Yeah. Ooh, we're getting into some interesting things here. And you can see how that idea of the mountain of the gods spread to other cultures as well, like the Greeks with Mount Olympus.
Yeah, there are arguably 7 to 9 holy mountains around the world as you get into the polytheist accounts. Many
Yeah.
of them seem to be talking about one mountain, so there could be like branch mountains.
Yeah.
And so then that was not uncommon in polytheism. And so the best sort of relevance I would make to that is in the 7 hills or mountains of Rome that Romulus and Remus settled in, offspring of the god Ares, and progenitors of the Julia gens of the 100 Roman senator bloodlines. Palatine Hill was probably the most important hill from a religious perspective, and it had a branch hill called Vaticanus Hill that the
Mm.
Vatican was built on.
Okay.
So mountains and branch mountains of the same belief system is not unusual.
Right.
And if you're having different civilizations, and just as you have 7 to 9, depending on which numbers you want to use and which accounts you want to use, there are 7 wandering stars. You also have Satan and possibly his consort to add 2 more on to get to 9. And you have these cultures that are going to require an imagery of that type of mountain. So it's going to be a constant. And they use those constants throughout polytheism, which is why you see pyramids, which is a replication of a holy mountain, which makes it such a holy place, and probably a technology as well, as we learn more about some of these things. And you see these
Yeah.
constants in building styles. You see these constants in the religion, just different vernacular names for the gods. You see the constant in the accounting of prehistory, accounting of the flood. Everything is similar. So we're talking about one great civilization that may have sections or sects to it, and ruled over by different gods within the pantheon as part of their allotment, just as Deuteronomy 32 talks about this allotment of the 70 nations that are numbered in Exodus 1:5 by the sons of Jacob or Israel, and the 70 patriarchs that are listed in the table of nations in First Chronicles and Genesis 10.
I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but maybe we can just, while we're discussing the mountain and importance of it, and as we look at throughout the generations, that there were these gods, Nephilim, that claimed to be the kings, and they ruled over it. We see throughout history, every time there were kings, important kings, that they claimed to be gods, even in the time of Jesus. So there's an important message here of why Jesus asked that question to Peter as well. But who do you say I am? And he said, "But you are the Son of God." But Gary, maybe you can explain a little bit just the context here for people to understand where they were and why he asked this
Yeah,
question.
yeah. And we talked about how important Mount Hermon is. And Jesus and the disciples, they travel up to the Bashan region, which is, the area below Mount Hermon. And Bashan is called the land of giants in the Bible.
Yeah,
Rapha is the Hebrew word there. And so, like Edrei and Ashtaroth were the capitals of King Og's 60 Pentapolis city-states that were in the Bashan region. And there's other nations in there as well. But this area that Jesus and the disciples traveled to is Mount Hermon. So why travel there? It's like, that's a long ways to go from the Galilee or from Jerusalem. But
yeah,
they did it. And it's Jesus announces with Peter that he's going to build his church on that rock. And Peter has his name changed,
yeah,
meaning rock, right? That he's going to be the
right,
rock of the church, just as Jesus is the supernatural rock to the church.
right.
And they're going to the place where the council of the gods that we just talked about is centered at, in the council of the Detanu, as the Ugaritic text calls this assembly of the royales that was there at Mount Saphon or Mount Sion or Mount Hermon. And so they're announcing, Jesus is announcing to the gods who rule this earth, as Psalms 82 talks about with the council of the gods, that Satan sits above to counterfeit the imagery in Isaiah 14 that we also talked about of God's throne in heaven. Because everything polytheism does is a counterfeit or a
Right.
copy. And so this is the location that would represent where Baal ruled from. Baal and the Baalim gods that rule in this council in the Bible. And that
Yeah,
Baal would go back and forth between earth and heaven every day through the gateway to Hades, or the cave that's located at the bottom of Mount Hermon to Hades. And it's a, a worldwide known shrine even to this day. And the Pan Temple was located there as well, which
mm,
is right beside that cave. And so
yeah,
Jesus is announcing to the ruling council of the gods that has rights over this earth, just as not that long ago in the time of Jesus, Satan showed Jesus all the different empires of the earth and offered it to him because he had legal right to at that point in time.
yeah,
And Jesus was in a very weakened sort of state as he was fasting for 40 days in the wilderness.
yeah.
And so Jesus has just announced to them that he is going to build his church. And with the starting of building that church, and with what the angels do not know at this point in time, because they're going to have him crucified, the princes, the archons, are going to have Jesus crucified. And if had they known about the resurrection, they would not have done that, as First
Right.
Corinthians talks about. That this is the start of that march towards the resolution to the angelic rebellion through the resurrection.
Mm,
And he's announcing he's going to build that to take that to the world through the rock, Peter.
right.
And he's going to build his church upon that. So this is an extraordinary event, probably the most important event in humankind's history.
Yes.
And something big is going to be following, and that's going to be the crucifixion and the resurrection, and the ability to give us that gift to become like the sons of God that
Yeah.
is given to us at the time of Pentecost in Acts 2 as a promise. Even though we have human fathers, to be raised up like angels in the future time through the resurrection process. There's several resurrections as it's described in the New Testament and the Old Testament. And that we will be not only like angels, but we will also judge those fallen angels for the
Right.
crimes they committed against us and against creation. And so this gets to be a significant um, event. And when you start to place that now in context with 1 Peter 3, where it's talking about Jesus after he's been crucified and his physical body has been killed, and he is could be in his spirit form, could be in his body form, we're not told, but he is in Hades or Sheol, and he goes to a place where the spirits are imprisoned. These
Yeah.
are the fallen angels, both before and after the flood, that created the giants and did the worst things to humankind. And these are also, as are in the sides of the pit prison in Ezekiel 32, the terrible one.
Yeah.
These are the worst of the giant, the offspring of the fallen angels. And he's speaking to them. Now, we're not told what he says to them, but within 3 days, he's going to be resurrecting. So we know it's going to have something probably to do with that. It's going to have something to do with the crimes that they did. And he's communicating with them. And my speculation is he is saying, just as I said I was building my church and announced that at Mount Hermon, I am now telling you something that you didn't know, that I'm going to resurrect on the Sunday. And when I do, your rebellion is over, because through that resurrection process, we're going to adopt humankind as my brothers and raise them up to be like angels and above angels as the inheritors of eternity. So this
Mm.
relationship is even being discussed in the greatest of terms
Yeah.
in the New Testament in the time of Jesus, and we don't get any context to these events taught in the
Yeah.
churches.
You're right. You're right. And it is so important because a lot of people say, well, we're all children of God. No, we're not. The New Testament says that only those who accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior has the right to become children of God, right?
Yes.
So there's all these details that you need to connect with all the verses. But I want to focus in on the end times as well, because we see that he goes and he speaks to these spirits. But then we see in the book of Revelation, they will be released in the time of tribulation, right? Which is, I don't want to live. I don't want to be there at that time. But I want to go back to those same spirits to help people to understand why they are locked up in the pit. And so I want to go back a little bit because they overstep the boundaries, right? And those are the spirits we read about in Genesis 6, verse 4. So if we can start with Genesis 6, verse 4, move from there to explain how the fallen angels created the Nephilim. After that, the flood, that they were there as well, and then reigned over the world, establishing their kingdoms for centuries, and what happened 2,000 years ago, and from there to where we are now, and then to what's going to happen in times. There's a
Yeah,
lot to
so
go through.
there's a lot to cover there, so we'll try and move fairly quickly on this to get the information in. So in Genesis 6:4, the sons of God go to the daughters of men to create giants, as the KJV says. The Hebrew word is Nephilim is the plural, and this means a tribe of giants. It means a giant. Um, it means also a tyrant and a bully, which are just more descriptions in terms of who these giants are, just as in the Ugaritic text that we were talking about, or in Sumeria and elsewhere around the world, the gods are called bulls, and so are their offspring, the giants.
Mm.
And so when we hear about the bulls of Bashan that are mocking Jesus on the cross in the book of Psalms, these are the two groups that are being talked about. And tyrant goes back to the bloodline kings, because the Nephilim take over the kingship dynasties both before and after the flood.
Right.
So that is the tyrant is Tyrannos, as it was known in the Greek. And these were the Gyges kings, and these were bloodlines from, in their belief system, the Olympian gods. So, from Hercules, son of Zeus, and the human female alchemy after the flood. So we need to understand that these giants were real, and they took over the dynasties and the governorship and established polytheism all around the earth before the flood, which is why the flood is brought. And the technology that they had comes from the fallen angels, and that had the capability, I think, that had the capability to destroy the world by fire, which wasn't permitted.
Right.
That reserved, according to 2 Peter 3, for the end time. So God permits the flood to come, brings the flood, or orders the fallen angels to bring the flood themselves, as it's recorded in all the polytheist accounts, as part of the punishment, I think, to watch their offspring die, because God is doing an intercession and they're subservient to the God Most High, so that all the names in the book of life will have an opportunity to keep those names that were written in before creation, or have it blotted out. So it's an intercession. And then this crosses the flood. These organizations, and we talked about this in part one of the two shows, and that Nimrod is the first sort of king over the Noahites and introduces the Babel religion, which is the antediluvian religion. But he's also going to intermarry amongst these giants in Sumer. And that's one of the reasons why we don't get his genealogy thereafter recorded in the table of nations.
Yeah.
And so you're going to create this hybrid race of humans and giants after the flood. And the giants after the flood, the Rephaim versus the Nephilim, which is used 25 times in the Old Testament, versus Nephilim, which is only used 3 times. And the Nephilim are antediluvian, and Rephaim tend to be more post-diluvian, although I do leave a small crack open for giants surviving the flood. But second incursion by the offspring gods, as we talked about in part one, the Baalim Council biblically, at Mount Hermon biblically, are the ones who created the Rephaim giants. And we see Rephaim in Genesis 14 and Genesis 15 as giant tribes. We also see where it says, whether it's in Deuteronomy 2 or the times of David, where it says giant, that's the Hebrew word Rapha, and Rephaim is as the plural.
Hey guys, I really hope you're enjoying the video so far, but I have some big and exciting news to share. I'm writing a novel with my brother set in the world before the flood. It's going to feel like a mix of fantasy and historical fiction. Much like Lord of the Rings, Warcraft, or Narnia. But here's the best part. It is based on biblical and archaeological truths. In this book, we're diving deep into the ancient world of fallen angels, the Nephilim, and the family lines of Adam, specifically Seth and Cain. You'll get to experience how they lived in cities like Nippur and Eridu, how they fell into darkness, and how they became so evil in a world filled with beasts and dragons like the Behemoth and Leviathan, described in the book of Job. If you've ever wondered what the world was like before the flood, in the antediluvian world, then this novel is going to bring it to life in a way you've never seen before. It's packed with action, spiritual battles, and deep insights into humanity's early struggles. It answers the biggest questions of humanity. Why are we here? What is the meaning of life? And where are we going when we die? And here's the exciting part. I'm giving you, all my amazing subscribers, exclusive access to the first 4 chapters of the novel for free. Just click the link in the video description, enter your name, email, and we'll send it to you. Now, if you're watching this video much later, this book might already be out. And then you can just grab it at any of our websites at DLM Christian Lifestyle or Ruach Entertainment. Now, this book is perfect for unbelievers and even for those on the fence when it comes to their faith, because it's a gripping story that pulls you in, and before you know it, you will see how it aligns with the truth in God's Word, the Bible. Now, thank you for sticking with me. Let's get back to the message of today.
And we see Rephaim in Genesis 14 and Genesis 15 as giant tribes. We also see where it says, whether it's in Deuteronomy 2 or the times of David, where it says giant, that's the Hebrew word Rapha. And Rephaim is as the plural. So these giants take over the dynasties again, set up just as they did before the flood. The first two classes with humans populating the small entrepreneurial class of blacksmiths and tailors, and then the slave and working class at the fourth level. And that's a constant around the world, both before and after the flood, in all cultures, all continents around the world. And so these are the ones that are ruling over us and trying to destroy us, because that's why they were created, so that we do not reach our destiny. So this pitched battle rages from the time of after the flood. Again, it resurges from the time of Noah to the time of Jesus. It's raging. And even at all through that part, not even the fallen angels know what the end game for God is going to be until the conversation that Jesus has with them, well, in Hades and Sheol and at the pit prison. And so from that point on, the fallen angels know the gig is up, but they continue to mislead their spurious offspring that they can still win and that they can still achieve their goal. And they're out, and the fallen angels' only goal is to destroy as many so that they don't follow God and become saved. And so this is what has been transpiring from the time of Jesus till now. And there's a set time when all of this comes to a close in the end time. And so all of these players, organizations, and agendas are in place as part of the context for the end time. So we have to sort of make those connections if we want to understand that we're not just fighting the visible ones, we're fighting the invisible ones. And it's the invisible ones that are calling the shots, because the visible ones, the spurious offspring and the followers, are communicating with their superior celestial white masters, as they might be called, spirit guides, aliens, you name the different things who they're communicating with. It's all part of the rebellious hierarchy that is trying to create a Star Wars event where you have the rebels fighting against the evil God of the universe, which is that rendezvous with destiny they want to bring on, because the fallen angels are still lying to humans and the hybrids that they can win this battle, that they can win their freedom to have a realm on their own where the gods can walk amongst them again, and they can create new demigods going into the future. So that's the ambition. And one of the things that's important to understand in some of the context in the New Testament is that you do not hear about fallen angels, Old Testament or New Testament, who are slandering God or celestial beings. Even Michael, when he's dealing with Satan, is very careful in the words that, he basically, and they're dealing with Moses's body, which is another interesting story. But all Michael does is basically say, God rebuke you, right? So he doesn't do anything else, but he institutes his authority to reclaim Moses away from Satan. And that's part of the upbringing of Moses. I don't have really time to go into today, but God knew all of this was going to happen, and he's trumping Satan's legal case to the oaths that Moses would have sworn at Heliopolis as being raised as a royale into the mystery religions and becoming an adept of those religions before he's converted back. But that's part of God's plan. So the fallen angels use the spurious offspring and their descendants and those who follow their religions to slander God, to slander celestial beings, to slander Jesus. But they don't do it themselves because they know the power of God. So they're working through as avatars, allegorically through their avataras. And I'm not saying that's not a real possibility in that because they can become an avatara to an avatar and expect that to be part of Antichrist, and where he gets his power from. And there's a difference between the avatara and the avatar. Avatara is the fallen angel like Vishnu, who entered into Buddha to give him the wisdom, or as Satan entered into Judas to give him the courage to go through with the betrayal of Jesus. And so the one who receives that, hosts that spirit into him to give them more knowledge, power, whatever the gift will be, is the avatar, with an A at the end.
Ooh, wow, we're going through this very quick, guys. I hope you're keeping up with us. But if you want to go back a little bit, because we discussed some of the tribes and everything before and right after the flood as well. So please watch that first video, and a lot of what we discuss here will be a bit more clear. But Gary, I want you to continue, and just people, everybody watching, just breathe a
Take a
little
deep
bit.
breath. Yes. So when we want to look at now end time prophecy, and we tend to look as Christians through the New Testament prophecies versus the host of the ones in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we don't get the original Hebrew, we get Greek. So we have to look at the Greek language and look for sort of cognate terms that would be in the Hebrew of the Old Testament to make some connections, especially when it comes to all the players. Certainly when we see angels that are fallen angels as we would know them, and Nephilim, fallen one, as that would be in Hebrew, come out of the pit prison in Revelation 9 just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, 6 months to a year and a half before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And if people want to know where I get that last 7 years, Daniel 9:27, where you have that last week of years of the 70 weeks is reserved to play out to fulfill all vision and prophecy and bring in the age of righteousness and the Messiah, is reserved for the last 7 years. And the book of Revelation is split into 3.5 year portions, with the commission of the 144,000 and the two witnesses marked by 3.5 years in Revelation 11. And then we get 3.5 years for the reign of Antichrist in Revelation 13 that follows, and also numbered by in Revelation 12 after the abomination, when the people of Judea flee to the wilderness to be protected for 3.5 years. So everything lines up once we sort of put the passages together. But if it's going to be like the days of Noah, that means the angels have to walk amongst us, and that's the fallen ones.
Yeah.
And they have to be ruling again, sort of visibly. That also means that their religion has to be established. It also means that their spurious offspring has to be more visible, either through descendants, survival of giants somehow, some way with angelic help, or a recreation of the giants, but that they're still going to be here. And that's the seed line that we referenced early on that's going to be dealt with at the time of Armageddon. And so how do we recognize these? So if we look at the Old Testament, we have some interesting prophecies in Joel 1, 2, and 3, and Ezekiel 38 and 39, which are very, very important in terms of some of the terms. And in those terms, we get two wars in Joel 1 and 2. We get a war there that's distinct from the one that's going to come, which is the day of the Lord and the wrath of the Lord in Joel 3. And this includes mighty ones. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, we get this great war that's going to happen in the last days. So it's distinct from the one from Revelation 20, which is 1,000 years later. And we know the timing of it's going to be before an event that Christians may not be aware called the Second Exodus, where Israel and Judah will be, in the last 3.5 years, reconciled back into the covenant by recognizing Jesus as their Messiah and led in Second Exodus to the wilderness to be joined back together. And as Daniel 12 and Ezekiel 37 also discuss, this is the resurrection and the judgment of Israel separate from the church. This needs to be done and is being completed in the year of the Lord's favor, talked about in Isaiah and in the book of Luke, before the year of the Lord's wrath, in time for reconciliation into the bride at the supper of the Lamb in Revelation 19. And this is the time of trouble in Daniel 12, which is the time of Jacob's trouble that Jacob will be saved out of. And Ezekiel 30 and 31 are second Exodus passages. And there's many second Exodus passages, and most Christians aren't aware of this because it's not taught. And that God said that if you didn't follow the covenant, we won't complete things through the blessings of the covenant. We'll complete things through the curses of the covenant. So that's what we're going through, is the curses of the covenant. And in the end time, he would bring them back into the covenant because he remembers his covenant from forever, and he will call them by name. So with that sort of as some of the timing of it, and second Exodus is also documented not only in Ezekiel 37 after the dry bones resurrection, but also in Ezekiel 39 after the Gog War. So it's before the Gog War. Now, mighty one is a term that's used in Ezekiel 39 for these ones that are slaughtered on Mount Hermon as fatlings or bulls of Bashan. Another interesting term that we need to keep in mind. But you also have mighty ones that are described in the Joel 1 and 2 war, which is the same as the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. And Joel 3 describes the Armageddon war. So I have these two great wars. And my speculation is the Gog war is going to be the counterfeit Armageddon Antichrist will take credit for as part of his qualifications and pedigree to claim he's the Messiah before Jesus comes. So that term that we're referring to is the mighty ones. Well, that's Hebrew Gibor and Gibborim in the plural.
Yeah.
And these are the kings. These are the top two classes that are described as these mighty ones in Joel 1, 2 and Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so Gibborim is the same term that's used in Genesis 6, 4 to describe the Nephilim as the mighty ones, the men of renown. Shem or Shemaim are the two root words, one being famous or infamous or of reputation, either good or evil. And the other one, as the root, is the heavenly ones. So these are the mighty ones who are infamous of the heavenly ones. So you even get that linkage of that creation even within the terms that they're doing. And these are, again, the infamous ones as the mighty ones. These are the mighty, infamous ones that are descended or recreated in the end time of the heavenly ones. So how do we make that connection into the New Testament? Because there's two different languages. In the book of Revelation, we'll talk about kings. It will talk about the great men, and it will talk about the great merchants. And so it's that word great that we want to really sort of talk about. So in Revelation 6:15, for example, has the kings of the earth and the great men. And in Revelation 19:18, at the time of Armageddon, you've got these kings and these great men again, right? So it's talking about a greater family of royals and nobility. So the words that are used in the translation out of Greek for this is mega and megastranes. And it goes back to the Indo-Aryan word meg, which basically means a large, vast, tall, big, and mighty individual, a giant, as it was understood by the Indo-Aryans. And mega means of great stature, of great age, of mass massive size, of a large height. So all of the words that are being used are describing giants or descendants of the giants, as the kings as the royales of the dynastic bloodlines of the giants, one or both. And Megastranes also means great men, and it produces grandes, which produces similar meanings to giant. And so it basically means lofty, as in fallen angels are talked about as lofty, or high ones, just as the royales are talked in that manner. And it means a pedigree, a genealogical pedigree from the lofty ones. And grandees is a significant term that's used within the royale nomenclature and titles and names and hierarchy. So it's embedded throughout their taciturn imagery and languages, that it embeds their sort of history. So we can look at these same kings and mighty ones of these wars that are talked about in the Gog War and in the Armageddon War as being the same beings as we would look at as the great men um, in the end time. We also get these great men and these kings in conjunction with Babylon.
Right.
So they're in league
Yes.
with them. So the language is there. We just have to make that sort of connection. And so all of that is now, from a biblical perspective,
Yes.
set the table for the players and the organizations. And we get all of its understanding from prehistory, including the Babylon religion, which is
Right.
rooted in the Hebrew word Babel. When we look at the organizational structure of the giants, both before the flood and after the flood, they have this polytheist religion.
Yeah.
And it's the same religion, and it's referenced as the daughters of Babylon in the Old
Right.
Testament.
Yes.
That's there
Yeah.
for a reason, so that we understand the context. And it's a mystery religion, which is an initiatory religion, and this is the mother of the harlots, or the daughters of Babylon. And all of
Yeah.
the terms that are used, whether it's harlot or terms like that, are Old Testament terms as an allegory for worshiping other gods than the God
Yes.
Most High. So we can make those definitions and those connections, and that this Babylon religion is going to ride the beast of empires in Revelation 12, 13, and 17, hold the reins over them. So
Mm.
much so that they'll partner with Antichrist at the midpoint of the last 7 years to overthrow Babylon. Plus, Babylon grows very, very wealthy. So when we talk about the beast of empires, that's the thing that rises out of the sea in Daniel 7
Yeah.
and in Revelation 13. And it's like a hydra. It's a multi-headed leviathan, serpentine imagery. Again,
Yeah.
linking that serpentine imagery and bloodline to all the beast empires. And you could define that through two different ways to get to seven. One is through Daniel 7, where we have the four winds, the four archangels of prophecy, whip up out of the sea the beast empires, and we get Babylon being the first one. Then we have Persia. Then we have Greece. And then we have what will come will be Rome and the Iron Empire. And then in the end time, you'll have that empire extend out of the last empire, the Roman Empire, for the 10 kings, the 10 toes, the 10 horns, same allegory for the same meaning
Mhm.
for the end time. And these beast empires are adequately named because it's the spiritual beasts that slander God. And
Yeah.
Antichrist is the ultimate beast. He'll be the eighth empire at the
Yeah.
midpoint of the last 7 years, who takes that to the same level Nimrod likely did, as an
Right.
archetypical Antichrist figure. And so he's like a new Nimrod, as I call him in book one.
Yeah.
And so the beast empires are the descendants of the royal giants that were created. And what they're
Mm.
trying to do throughout history is create a world empire, just as they were trying to do before the flood, which brought the
Yeah.
flood. and the violence and everything that came about with that, along with the godliness, because they're imposing this universal religion. And so these beast empires, they're not permitted to do one thing. They're permitted to come about, but the thing they cannot do is present their antichrist wannabe,
Yeah.
because that's ordained for the end time. So Michael, the great archangel, fights against these empires in the book of Daniel. And he's fighting
Okay.
against Persia and Greece as a couple of those examples, right? He doesn't prevent the beast empires from coming. He prevents that beast empire then, to succeed in presenting an antichrist figure and bring about the ordained times before the ordained times, which is what they're trying to do. So you can imagine
Yeah.
somebody like Nebuchadnezzar or a Nimrod or Caesar or Alexander as beast antichrist wannabes.
Right. Yep.
And so we get to the number through the beast empires in Daniel 7 this way, of the 7 kings of empires that Revelation is talking about. You get there through Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and then the new Roman Empire, and that gives you 5. Before that is Assyria, and you could look at an empire of Syria. That's with one of the Sargon kings or kings, pick anyone you want, or you could take that all the way back to Nimrod, which establishes the Assyrians through his descendants, according to the Bible. I think, and I'll come back to what I think in just a second, and Egypt is the other one. So one of the relationships in the first allegory is that these beast empires have an intimate relationship with Israel.
Yeah.
So in Egypt, they're born into a nation, and then they're brought into the land of the covenant at the time of the Exodus. Assyria imposes part of the curses of the covenant onto the northern kingdom and dispersed them into all of the nations, and not to be seen again until the last 7 years, likely by the 144,000 who are going to go out and call them.
Mm.
And so you have the next empire, which is Babylon, which is going to apply the curses of the covenant onto the southern kingdom and take them in exile to Babylon, but then they come back through the permission of the Persian Medes Empire to build the temple through
Yeah.
Cyrus, beginning with. And so an intimate relationship there. You're going to have the Greek Empire succeed the Persian Medes Empire, and they're going to do 2 things. One, they're going to invade all of the land and rule over Israel, and they're going to create an abomination like process by decimating, but doing the abomination-like things in the temple as part of the rule, just as Nebuchadnezzar did the same type of thing and
Yeah.
created an image for people to worship. And then you have Rome, who is going to oversee the crucifixion of Jesus with the legal tender as the empire, and then they're going to exert more of the curses for a rejection of the Messiah to be dispersed in the diaspora of Jerusalem and the destruction of Jerusalem. And so we should expect a relationship with the beast empire with Israel and Judah in the end time, which is the 7th empire, when Israel begins to awaken and remember who they are, and starting their process back to reconciliation. And then you're going to see in the time of Jacob's trouble, the Exodus, when the Antichrist is the 8th empire. So that gives you the 7 and the 8 empires that are talked about in Revelation 17 and Revelation 13. The 8th empire is mentioned in Revelation 17. So Daniel 8 is another special one, and you get to the same number in a different allegory that adds more information. That's where you have
Mm.
Persia and Greece as part of these beast empires, and you take that understanding from Daniel 7, and it follows
Yeah.
immediately. Now, in Daniel 8, you have an antichrist that's going to rise, who's a single horn, just as the single horn rises amongst the 10 in Daniel 7. So they're related, they're not contradictory, just adding more information. And so you have Alexander's empire, which is 1. Then it's split into 4 parts, is 5 after Alexander's death. Rome is part of that and succeeds that's 6. And then you have the end time empire, that's 7, and Antichrist is 8. And now you can use all of that information together, that in the details, and overlay them together onto the New Testament and bring out the full meaning.
Hmm.
So it's important to understand these beast empires are going to be rising. These are worldwide empires. So you're going to have 10 groups of nations, as these kings are emperors of these individual ones. And before the end time can come, we're going to need to see that come into play, as well as Babylon rise. So, but I just wanted to make the imagery come to life from the Old Testament into the New Testament, so that we can understand the perfection in that imagery,
Yeah.
and that when we look at the chronology that Jesus provides in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and 21, there's a specific generation that we're not taught about in the church. That's the fig tree generation, where everything that Jesus said would happen in the order of events that he set down. And we know that it's a sequence of events, it's not just haphazardly grouped. Or just
Hmm.
grouped by similar types of catastrophes together, or the other different ways people try and rationalize it away. Because Jesus said, and then this happens, and then this happens, and he puts the abomination in the middle, and then
Yeah.
advises us to go learn about Daniel when that abomination event happens, and the full details of the meaning of that, so that we can understand that, and that will help us to understand the book of Revelation as well. So that word then is the Greek word toda. And it means
Hmm.
exactly that. It's the then. It's the sequence of the event. So do not let people try and reimagine what Jesus said and put all prophecy around what Jesus said, not vice versa. And then all the conflicts will disappear. And even the book of Revelation is going to fit that way. If you All you have to do is remember that there's 2 parts to the timing of Revelation. One is the time of John, and when he's going to get the 6 letters to the churches, and then he's going to deliver those letters to the churches. And then you
Yeah.
have Revelation 6 for the things that have to happen. And so this is the testimony of Jesus Christ
Mm.
given to the angel to show John in a vision, in the spirit of vision. And so it has to fit with what Jesus provided for us as a template, because the
Yes.
Bible is not in conflict. So now you can put Revelation 6 to Revelation 14 to the middle in the first half before the abomination in Jesus' chronology. Then you can put 15 to 19 in the second half of his chronology. And then you have the millennium, that's, a separate piece on the end before we go into eternity. And everything makes sense then. And I
Mm.
do a few other things, like when I do my um, research on prophecy, and anything I do in the Bible, anything I take from outside the Bible, I measure against what's in the Bible. But one of the things that I think because there's so many different ways to view prophecy, and they can't all be right.
Yeah.
And what I say is test everybody's, including what I say.
Yeah.
But one of the things I try and do is and one of the red flags to most of the approaches, because they use preconceived approaches. So they try and fit everything into that notion. Put everything around what Jesus said, not what
Mm.
your preconceived notion is. That's number one. Number two is don't leave out inconvenient passages. And that's
Yes.
one of the major issues with the eschatological approaches. If they don't like a passage,
They
they
ignore it.
just they ignore it, or they try and convince you it doesn't say what you read, even though it says
Yes.
that. They try and reimagine it, and they try and reimagine what Jesus said when he doesn't fit what their preconceived conclusion is. It's very much akin to what happened in the time of Jesus, is that the Israelites, the people of Judah, the southern kingdom at that time, They missed their Messiah because they didn't want to recognize the inconvenient passages to all of the prophecies about the coming of Jesus.
Yeah.
Nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. Just as we are part of the new covenant, we will make the same mistakes,
Right.
unfortunately, as the first covenant.
Right. We need to not look through the lenses of our culture of the today, but live in their language to fully understand prehistory, the how and why Hebrew certain words were used, but also then the New Testament with the Greek, and then connect it with everything else and connect what Jesus said himself. It's amazing that we have God, Jesus, coming down into our dimension and speaking and revealing these things to us. For me,
Yes.
it's like sometimes we go to church and we're just sitting in the church, we're just learning about Jesus. It is amazing.
Yeah.
We're learning about Jesus, about God.
I was going to say, here's an example of how stiff-necked we are um,
Yeah,
as a people. So, Jesus, when he was here, he said, I could bring somebody back from Abraham's bosom, which is a parable and an allegory, not that there's a place, but that's what a lot of the people in the society believed at that time. So he used that as an example. So I could bring somebody back from the dead from Abraham's bosom, and nobody would believe him. And
yeah,
then he raised Lazarus from the dead who was asleep, which because he's human, right? And we
yeah,
sleep in heaven until our resurrection. And nobody obviously believed him.
yeah,
So we have to understand this is our nature. And we had the Messiah who was here, and his own people who should have known intimately that he was coming and what to expect, rejected him
yeah,
because he didn't meet their preconceived conclusion.
exactly. That is so true. And I realize, I think more than ever, Christians specifically, they don't know the Bible today, as they even did, let's say, 50 years ago. A lot of Christians don't read the whole Bible, and
They they
preaching
do
even
not.
changed over time as well. They go to sermons that's just mostly motivational messages, but it doesn't go deep into the Word of God, so that the truth can change and you live according to the truth. But Gary, I think when we look at the world now, we are closer than ever. When we look at all the chess pieces being played, we're here at the end times, and I'm getting excited because I can't wait for the second coming of Jesus. I really can't.
Yeah, and I think we're probably in the fig tree generation.
Yeah,
Now, we don't know how long that generation is.
Long ago, after the rise of a deep darkness, before the great flood, the world was ancient, untamed, and filled with wonders long forgotten. Mankind spread into scattered tribes, forging cities like Nippur, Eridu, and many watchful outposts across the untamed earth. The sons of God breached the divide. The world bowed to their corruption. The blood of Seth and Cain shaped the fate of generations amidst the roar of the behemoth and terror of the Leviathan. And under the oppressive shadow of the fallen Anunnaki, humanity stood on the precipice of total corruption. In a world ravaged by darkness, one man, born a slave, rises as a warrior, driven by his search for truth and meaning. But his journey is more than survival. It reflects the cry of humanity itself, and leads to an ancient prophecy. From the darkened halls of Eridu to the Temple of Light in Nippur, Uldako walks a path of survival, of bonds broken and kept, pursued by beasts, shaped by love. scorched by loss, and caught in the war behind all wars. The war between the sons of light and the lords of shadow. One brought forth from the blood of the dragon, the other born from the light. The war between them has already begun. Lightborn, Dawn of Darkness, a new novel from Ruach Entertainment. Get the first chapters free at ruachentertainment.com.
I'm getting excited because I can't wait for the second coming of Jesus. I really can't.
Yeah, and I think we're probably in the fig tree generation.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know how long that generation is. We could use examples out of the Bible. So the generation is described as 40 years in the time of the Exodus and the time in the wilderness. The book of Psalms says 70 years. And then there's 120 years that life was limited to in Genesis 6:3
Yeah.
for sentient beings. And so physical sentient beings. And so we don't know which one is in play. So we want to be careful, but we're also told to watch and that we can recognize the times. Maybe not the exact hour of Jesus' first coming, of the days of Son of Man, or as Hosea 9:7 talks about the visitations of Jehovah.
Yeah.
Jehovah is Jehovah of the Elohim, which is the term that we use in the New Testament as the word logos of the God Theos. So same term, same cognate application, and we get introduced to Jehovah of the Elohim in 2:4, even though he's there in Genesis 1 as Amar when God speaks. And we also have the Ruach of the Elohim, the Spirit of God, in Genesis 2, hovering over the chaos. And Psalms 104 talks about when God sends his spirit, the earth is renewed. So all three are there. Elohim is the superlative singular understanding of El Elyon there. So all three are there in the creation process. Everything's in perfection. And so you just have to let it read.
Right.
And so when we look at how things need to connect into the Old Testament, we have to understand it from that understanding that this is a long-term plan that is being played out through free choice. And so this generation is a generation that all of these events that Jesus talked about are going to happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. So sometime with 120 to 40 is a generation where we should do it. I would say 70 or 120 is more likely. And that connects to the fig tree generation that most Christians have never heard of, which is one of the three overarching signs to the sequence of events. And the three overarching signs are the fig tree generation, the days of Noah, and the sorrows. And you have to understand that to understand. But we get the fig tree understanding from Jesus and the tribes of Israel. And how we get there is that in prophetic allegory in the Old Testament, the vine is the northern kingdom of Israel. That was lost. And the fig tree is the southern kingdom.
Yeah.
So now when Jesus, just before he goes into the temple and is going to do a prophecy about the temple's destruction and the city's destruction, and then after that, the disciples want to know, okay, tell us about the signs of the end time and when you're coming, because this is my speculation here, but because I think they're thinking, oh, this is pretty serious stuff. We better get some more information on it. But that's just me thinking, like, how does this whole process? And so before he goes into the temple, he goes to a fig tree, and then he kills the fig tree. And he says that, and because the disciples are asking, well, why are you doing this? And he's saying, this fig tree no longer bears fruit because they're about to reject their Messiah.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so Now, when you roll forward to see, when you see that fig tree in bloom again, and obviously after the diaspora will happen to Israel and the city is destroyed, but now when you see that tree replanted there, this is the fig tree generation. So what date would we use that if, as I speculate, that I think we are in the fig tree generation?
Yeah.
We could use 1947 as the declaration, or 1947 as the declaration. 1948 was the War of Independence,
Mm.
as one of those years as the start of the fig tree generation. But because Jerusalem is the epicenter of end time prophecy, and
Right.
that they have to control Jerusalem, I would look at 1967 as a more likely start date to the fig tree generation. So if we use 70 or 120 years, then we could be on the edge of the last 7 years starting, or it could still be
Yeah.
a ways away. So we want to be careful of it if it's 120 years. And there are still significant hurdles to
Right.
overcome. So we still need that world government. We still need the universal religion, Babylon. We need the false prophets to come to bring
Yeah.
about Babylon. And the universal religion needs to be in place so that in Daniel 9:27, when Antichrist is part of the negotiating process to create this covenant of death, that the people living in the land of the covenant at that time will be permitted to begin their sacrifices again on a wing or an overspreading or an extremity of the temple, which cannot
Mm.
happen while Islam is still separate from the universal religion. So Islam won't permit it. So they're going to be destroyed or wrapped into the universal religion, just as I think Christianity, for the most part, gets wrapped into the universal religion through Babylon, which is what Jesus is talking about in the first 3.5 years with the events that are going on in the affliction or the tribulation of the saints of that time. And so lots of things yet to happen.
Yes, yeah. And you can see some of those things happening already, even with the Catholic Church that just want to include all other religions already and being more open to be okay with everything. Well,
I was going to add on to that. They are wanting to position themselves and are on record as wanting to be the spiritual center for the New World Order.
yeah,
So they're already understood Catholicism as universal religion. They're already in Rome.
yes,
And I'm not convinced that they're, by definition, the Babylon religion, but they're going to be a significant part about bringing it about, at least from a Christian perspective. And they're probably going to be a branch religion because, again, Vaticanus Hill is a branch from the Sibylline prophecy, Palatine Hill, um, and that Babylon will rest on the seven hills or the seven mountains.
right. So interesting. And then, of course, the temple needs to come with the Antichrist sitting on the temple, claiming to be God. And of course, that will
Yes,
be the shock for a lot of Jews because then they will realize when he really reveals himself, oh, this is not the Messiah. Jesus
yes.
Christ, the Messiah. So it will start to change everything. Of course, the rebellion, but then there's something interesting. I want to close, if we can, because Jesus is going to come right at the end, but there's going to be this millennium kingdom, and then after that, the devil is going to be released, but he's going to gather the whole world again in rebellion. And so I think a lot
Yeah,
of people also wonder, how is that possible after
yeah.
Jesus' perfect reign on earth? How could that be? Maybe you can share some light on that.
Well, yeah, because it's an important detail because we have that gap before we move on into eternity, right?
Right.
And so it's there for, a very, very important reason. The first reason is that it's going to be, so there's going to be survivors from Armageddon because Jesus steps in lest all flesh would be destroyed. And
Yes.
there's going to be not only those who are in second Exodus that will move in there, but there'll be Gentile nations because you're going to have Gog and Magog as references as kind of like, I think, representing Gentile nations in Revelation 20 for that war. So you're going to have a reign of 1,000 years by the word of God. And all those ones resurrected who refused to take the mark of the beast and refused to worship Satan, refused to worship Antichrist, who are going to rule with Jesus from Jerusalem. Israel will be restored to the covenant land, and all the nations will be marked by the 70 sons of Israel.
Whew, I'm getting goosebumps.
And people are going to do pilgrimages to Jerusalem and to the worship, because that's the center of the world. That's in God's land that he gifted to Israel, that the giants illegally squatted in
Yeah.
knowingly, and waited for the nation of hope to come along to wipe them from the face of the earth, because they're there to do the bidding of the fallen angels. And
Right.
so the context is very, very important. And in the time of the conquest, Israel was fighting giants and hybrid giants. And that's why book
Yes.
2 goes through all of that in ways that no other book has done before.
Yeah.
And so when we sort of look at all of that in terms of the millennium, we have this 1,000-year reign in direct contrast to the previous 6,000 years going, or 7,000 years, 6,000 years going back to Adam, right? Complete opposite, poles apart. And yet
Yeah.
there's a rebellion at the end when Satan is released, and it doesn't take him very
Right.
long, a short time. And we do understand the words of that, micros chronos, as it's in the Greek. And we get that exact same term in Revelation 6 for the resurrection of the first part of the first fruits, who are being told to wait for a little while longer, a little season, for the saints to be martyred as they were for the testimony of Jesus in the tribulation of the saints, the
Yeah.
affliction of the saints, Philipses in Matthew 24 and in Revelation 7. So it should be translated as tribulation in Matthew 24:8. And it's different than the great tribulation of the last 3.5 years in Matthew 24:21. And also note that Mark 13:19, the parallel passage, doesn't say tribulation there, it says affliction. Same description of the great affliction, and it's not seen since the beginning of time. And that's the Greek word thlipsis as well. It's translated inconsistently. Let's put it that way to be generous. And so they're told to wait for 3.5 years by implication, from the start of the 144,000 to Revelation 14:1, where you see the first fruits of the 144,000 in heaven. And by that time, the two witnesses, also part of the first fruits, who have their commission for 3.5 years,
Yeah.
have been martyred as well. So you see perfect harmony in the descriptions and the time frames. And so the longest we could move that to would be 3.5 years. Now, there's approaches out there that say we're in the time of the little season now, and it's for hundreds of years or thousands of years. And but it doesn't say that. And Revelations uses the word "and," which is kahi in Greek, which is the same cognate thing in terms of understanding sequence of events as cognate to tota for then in Jesus's chronology. So, and when you have, and there's passages where you have a season that's used and it's longer than that the proponents would try and reinvent micros, as in microscopic. That's where the word comes from, micro out of Greek, small.
Yeah.
It's going to be translated as long season from a different Greek word, but chronos being for the season. So again, you have to reimagine and reinvent what scripture says to get to your conclusion. That's a red flag. And
Yeah.
so this is a very short period of time. I would say probably even less than a year, because you get similar language in the armies being gathered in Revelation 16 to gather for war for Armageddon. And
Yeah.
that would take, less than a year. So this is probably, um, maybe longer than 3 months, maybe shorter than 3 months, but not a long period of time.
Yeah.
And so the point of it is that when Satan is released at the end of the 1,000 years, because he's put into the pit prison at the time of Armageddon,
Right.
And at the time when the false prophet and the Antichrist are sent to the lake of fire, at the time the rest of the angels are sent to the lake of fire, all the demons are sent to the lake of fire as their
Yeah.
punishment. Those who took the mark go to the lake of fire for eternal punishment. After that 1,000 years is up, Satan is released, and instantly there's this rebellion. Well, that's to underline with us. This is a necessary thing because God crosses all the T's, dots all the I's, all the
Mm.
possibilities. He's the Alpha Omega, and he knows this is going to happen from before he creates angels and or humans. And
Right.
so
But he
this
had to
is
give them
set.
free will.
Yes, he has to let things happen through free will, and it's a humbling of humans to
Right.
show that even though we were raised higher than angels because we had to earn immortality through faith, and angels were created immortal with intimate knowledge, where we had very little knowledge, we're no better than angels because when we received that intimate knowledge, many of us still rebelled.
Right. Yeah.
And if people don't think there's a lot of angels that rebelled, I would say rethink that
Mm.
because in the New Testament, we're told that the stars or the angels are uncountable, just as in the Old Testament with the analogy of the host of heaven, an army of angels, and they're represented allegorically as stars in the Old and New Testament.
Right.
So there's so many there we can't count them. In
Yeah.
two passages, we get a number of angels that are loyal that surround the throne, and it may be an allegorical number, but on all four sides of the throne, there's 10,000 times 10,000. Daniel
Right.
8 and Revelation.
Mm.
And so that would be 100 million. Revelation 12 tells us a third of angels will have rebelled by the midpoint. Did they all rebel at the beginning, or has there been leaking all the way through? We don't know. But
Yeah.
either way, if we do the calculation on this number, you could get 33 million or 50 million, depending on how you want to come up with a third there. And that's a lot of fallen angels, and not all of them were sent to the pit prison. And they've been ruling because army has rank and order, and they moved up when the parent gods were first sent to the pit prison, and then after the flood were like the offspring gods like the Baalim, who committed
Yeah.
the same crimes as before the flood, were also sent there. So there's a lot of fallen angels that are now going to become more ever present because they know their time is short, just as all the spurious will be.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, the worst of them will come out of the pit prison. Then there's the war in heaven, just as
Yeah.
Antichrist will go into heaven along with it, because he comes to power in Revelation 12 with 3.5 years left by the number there, and the 3.5 year reign numbered in Revelation 13, and the descriptions of Antichrist coming to power at the abomination in the book of Daniel. So 3.5 years, New and Old Testament. And he's going to throw some of the starry host down onto the ground and trample on them. So he's going to do what Nimrod was maybe intending on doing, but couldn't get done.
Right.
And so we have this war that's going to happen in the end time. That's as a result of everything that's happened throughout history. And then we have a repeat rebellion, amazingly, at the end of the millennium. And that's there so that we can move on, and all who move forward are loyal to God.
And those who truly chose him from their own free will. And then
Yes.
it's done. I can't wait. I want to remind everyone that when you look at the world and everything, our fight is not against each other, but against the spiritual forces in the air. And I think, Gary, I would like to talk to you again, just to go a little bit back as well, to talk about those fallen angels and what they really look like. We do get some descriptions here and there in the Bible as well, and even those that's in the pit that will be released, the way that John explains it, they look like this and like that. So we do go to those descriptions, but also to describe what the Nephilim look like, and maybe the Rephaim afterward as well. What do you say?
Sure. Absolutely.
All
That would be
right.
fun. Yeah.
All right. Guys, get these books because here he explains everything in detail that we talked about with Bible verses. And so you can go and make it a Bible study as well. Gary, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. I will invite you again And guys, before you go, remember to subscribe. Those of you who are new here, so you won't miss that new video with Gary as well. And then never forget, life is short, so do not waste yours. Cheers, guys.